If you wanted proof that MAGA conservatives are just losers who want to feel like winners, look no further than the most overtly anti-American symbol Trump trash love to use to convey their contrarianism, the Confederate battle flag. To many Americans today, this flag simply represents the region of the country that attempted and failed to secede from the Union. To a vast majority of rural, uneducated whites, however, this flag represents their tribe. I suspect that most people who wave this flag with pride today, at some point in their life, won something. It was probably sports in high school, but maybe it was one of those backwoods drag races. Maybe it was a pie-eating competition. It doesn't matter. The point is that at some point, Confederate flag wavers felt what it was like to be a winner, even if it was just for a moment. And as they got older and these earned victories became distant memories, unearned victory became their obsession. In May of 2020, Michigan Trumplicans protested at the state capitol, proudly flying Confederate flags next to swastika flags, next to Trump 2020 flags. Political luminaries, including Gretchen Whitmer herself, along with mainstream media pundits, were shocked to see Confederate flags used in protests not taking place in the South. How did the stars and bars come to mean so much to ultra-conservative Americans outside of the old Confederacy? Why are rural Michiganders symbolically aligning themselves with rural Southerners? Because just like the Bible and guns, the Confederate flag invokes all three of my major rhetorical anchors of conservative culture, thus making it a profoundly useful symbol of unity for those who seek to defeat change, regardless of where they live. Freshman year at Vanderbilt, I attended a town hall meeting involving changing the name of one of the dorms from Confederate Memorial Hall to simply Memorial Hall. Not that big of a deal, right? Well, I went with 3 other friends, and we ended up being the only students there. The rest of the room was filled with a handful of local alumni, but mostly it was local residents of Nashville who felt an attachment to Vanderbilt, even though they had no direct connection to the university other than living relatively close by. I'll never forget this white, overweight, 60-something local with obvious anger issues who wanted the dorm to remain Confederate Memorial Hall because, quote, "None of you have the right to tell me what my heritage is." To which I responded, what does the name of a dorm at a university which you neither attended nor work for have to do with your heritage? He made it clear he was not interested in participating in the discussion anymore because he refused to even make eye contact with me, choosing instead to stare straight ahead, almost like a poker player trying not to give anything away. One of my classmates from rural Arkansas that I came with chimed in, "But Tar, we shouldn't act like the Confederacy never existed." To which I countered, "I'm not suggesting we forget about the Confederacy. I'm simply suggesting we don't celebrate it." The room went silent until someone who hadn't spoken yet said, "Well, it's not about the Civil War so much as it's about Southern pride," which I replied, "What's so good about that?" What did our favorite dead Irish poet say about pride? There were sins whose fascination was more in the memory than in the doing of them. Strange triumphs that gratified the pride more than the passions and gave to the intellect a quickened sense of joy, greater than any joy they brought or could ever bring to the senses. Oscar Wilde. In case you Trump lovers forgot, the Confederacy doesn't exist because those traitors of the South lost to the patriots of the North. And while it was a long contest, it was not a close contest. Kind of like how Trump lost the election of 2020, and while it was a long contest, it was not a close contest. Right-wing America's favorite left-wing luminary, Karl Marx, wrote, "History repeats itself, first as a tragedy, second as a farce." Buckle up, because this is truly insightful. The most obvious example of this pattern ringing true for modern America is that the too close to call Nixon-Kennedy election of 1960 repeated as a tragedy in 2000 with Bush-Gore, and again as a farce in 2020 with Trump-Biden. Another trilogy of American history might be that the historical significance of the Civil War repeated itself as the cultural tragedy of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s. Then again as a farce with the Trump-inspired Civil War we're currently living through, revealed to the general public by the attempted insurrection of January 6, 2021. Boy, that Karl Marx sure had some interesting things to say about political patterns, didn't he? Maybe we should study his work instead of straw-manning it. To clarify, I understand the civil rights movement to have been legislatively victorious, but its results constitute an historical tragedy because those acts of racist violence should not have had to happen, on camera or otherwise, for the rest of the country to realize something was seriously wrong with the Deep South. Secondly, today's socioeconomic status of African Americans suggests that while the Civil Rights Movement and Civil Rights Act of 1964 delivered some progress, particularly in the arena of awareness, they didn't deliver enough legally or economically. Confederate flags waved proudly next to Trump flags and Nazi flags less than 8 months into Trump's presidency at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. Remember that one? It showcased predominantly angry white men exclaiming, "You will not replace us," and "Jews will not replace us." Charlottesville reminded retired Republicans like yours truly of the dark side of the GOP that we always knew was there, but never wanted to acknowledge, at least not publicly. This subsection of the right tolerated Reagan and the Bushes, but what they've always wanted in the White House is a Barry Goldwater or a George Wallace. And in 2016, they finally got one in the form of America's favorite son of a slumlord, Dirty Donald Douchebag. Internet sleuths used social media to track down and publicly identify attendees of the rally to reveal that many, if not most, right-wing protesters there that day traveled to Charlottesville from another state. I specifically remember one guy they found on the news that traveled all the way from Reno, Nevada. What is the empathetic arithmetic for someone who goes that far out of their way to participate in a public demonstration of hate? We know what hate looks like, but where does it come from? It's one thing to have racist, xenophobic, anti-Semitic, Islamophobic, or homophobic thoughts, but how do those thoughts become so powerful in someone's mind that they motivate real, logistically challenging, and financially demanding public action that runs the risk of destroying their reputation? As members of a society that at least claims to be interested in positive change, we understandably pay attention to the oppressed when acts of oppression take place. Pragmatism demands, however, that if you want to end the oppression, comprehend the oppressor. After all, defeating your enemy demands that you know your enemy. So what do we know about Confederate flag wavers thus far? We know they're losers who want to feel like winners. We know they're cognitively and behaviorally overgrown children, unaware of how their emotions affect them. Do employers seek to hire such men? Do desirable women seek to be with such men? No. And hell no. So now we know that these men are likely either unemployed or hate their job. We also suspect that most, if not all, lack the companionship of a woman. Not getting paid, not getting laid, no purpose, no passions, no happiness. You know what comforts you when you have nothing and no one? Community. When you're a rural, uneducated white, real community can be very hard to find since everyone lives so far away from each other. But symbols such as the Confederate flag unite these socially and culturally isolated people by invoking their shared experience of willful victimhood. And, somewhat surprisingly, the psychological expression of that victimhood is blame. What does a man do when faced with failure? He accepts responsibility, he changes his approach, he tries again. If he blames anyone, he blames himself. What does a boy do when faced with failure? He blames. He blames the rules. He blames his parents. He blames his classmates. He blames anything he can to avoid facing the hard, ugly, uncomfortable truth that he failed. MAGA trash, like the Charlottesville protesters, think to themselves, and for most it's probably subconscious, my life sucks. I'm not man enough to take responsibility for it and consider changing. So I'm just going to blame someone else for my problems. But who should I blame? I know. Someone that is different from me. Someone that I don't know. Someone that might as well be an invading alien from Mars to me. According to a profound Chinese proverb, he who blames others has a long way to go on his journey. He who blames himself is halfway there. He who blames no one has arrived. Since we know that Confederate conservatives aren't explorers, we know that their life experience will never include any kind of intellectual or spiritual journey. Their worldview, and by extension, their citizenship, will stay in the same place their entire life. It might not make immediate intuitive sense, but when you understand the most ignorant members of our society as nothing more than immature, unhappy, overgrown children, you can't help but conclude that racism, sexism, Anti-Semitism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and homophobia are nothing more than expressions of misplaced blame. Think about that the next time an act of racially motivated violence makes the news, because we all know it's only a matter of time before another one takes place. The oppressor blames those he oppresses or seeks to oppress for his miserable, lonely, purposeless life. Rural, uneducated whites struggle to transcend the ignorance of superficial reasoning. But there is at least a modest explanation for why people of color all look the same to them. The own race bias, also known as the cross-race effect, is the tendency for people to be better at differentiating people of their own race than they are people of another race. This one's pretty intuitive. It has a lot to do with early life social conditioning. If you're white and you spend your childhood going to school with only white people, people of color will feel very foreign to you when you encounter them. So when Trump trash say something to the effect of, all the Asian immigrants look the same to me, they're not lying. And the own race bias explains their social handicap. But does it excuse it? Does knowing that a lot of racists hold the ignorant views they do because of lack of life experience excuse their hate as nothing more than misguided contrarianism? The answer is that the own race bias can be used as an excuse for ignorance to the extent that the subject can differentiate between self-satisfaction and self-respect. Bad pride is self-satisfaction. Good pride is self-respect, which comes from working hard, especially when no one is looking. Letting your work speak for itself rather than boast about it, and contributing to your community without expecting anything in return other than a basic thank you. Taking pride in your work, hobbies, passions, and purpose is good for society. And notice how these expressions of pride are individualistic, not collectivistic. What you yourself offer society, not what your tribe offers society. The Confederate flag, on the other hand, inspires the exact same kind of pride your favorite sports team inspires, and it's not necessarily destructive to society, but it is when it's confused for self-respect. In another moment of profound existential irony, Confederate flag wavers have little to no self-respect because they have no sense of themselves as individuals. They have to depend on a long-distance community to give them self-satisfaction, when what they're really looking for is self-respect. Kind of like when a thirsty kid is given a cold soda instead of cold water. Sure, the soda tastes better at first and feels like it quenches your thirst, and you think you want another one a few minutes after the first, but after an hour or so, you're going to wish you had chosen the water, because dehydration sucks. Trump trash choose the soda of self-satisfaction, collective pride, thinking it's the water of self-respect. Individual pride. The price for that inauthentic self-satisfaction that tastes oh so good is blind faith loyalty to the tribe of treasonous Trump trash terrorists.